Black woman CEO denied service in her own car dealership, and the manager gets fired on the spot. You won't believe how this all unfolded right inside her own business. For more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to Simply Stories and never miss an episode. She arrived just after noon, the sun gleaming off the smooth surface of her electric luxury sedan as it quietly rolled into the dealership lot. Her car, sleek, modern, and unmistakably expensive, turned more heads outside than she would inside. Dressed in smart, neutral-toned business attire, she stepped out with calm confidence. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady, and everything about her said she belonged at the moment she stepped through the glass doors of the dealership. The atmosphere shifted. Inside, a polished showroom stretched out beneath crisp white lights. Rows of glossy vehicles stood like trophies, high performance models with intimidating price tags. At the reception desk, a young employee glanced up briefly before looking right back down at her monitor. Two salesmen standing near the convertible section broke off their conversation just long enough to glance in her direction, then resumed their small talk with low chuckles. She began walking around, her heels soft against the polished tile. Her fingers skimmed the side of a midnight blue performance car. She leaned in, studying the details on the spec sheet. Her attention wasn't casual, it was precise. She compared engines, tire sizes, drive modes. Still, not a single staff member approached. After nearly 10 minutes of browsing in silence, a junior salesman finally made his way over. He greeted her with a forced smile, his eyes drifting down to her bag and shoes, not expensive enough. Perhaps for what he expected. His tone was immediately condescending. You know, these models start at over $100,000, he said lightly, gesturing toward the car she'd just inspected. You might be more comfortable checking out some of our pre-owned selection. She didn't flinch. Actually, she said, her voice calm, I'm interested in this model's hybrid version. I heard it's only in limited release.
Do you
have one in stock? He blinked. There was a pause, a flicker of surprise before he scrambled to cover it. I'd have to check. But honestly, they're really hard to come by. We usually only reserve those for, serious buyers. But we have some excellent certified pre-owned options with extended warranties. Want me to show you those?
No, thank you, she replied evenly.
I'd rather speak with the manager. The smile on his face faltered slightly, but he nodded. Sure, just head up to the front desk and someone will page him. She walked up to the reception counter where a young woman was busy on her phone, thumbs flying over the screen. She waited politely. Seconds passed, then a full minute. Finally, the receptionist looked up and asked, Do you have an appointment? No, she said, but I was told I could speak to the manager. The woman narrowed her eyes, then gestured at the sitting area. You'll have to wait your turn. We're helping other clients right now. She turned to look to men. One in a business suit and another in golf wear were being ushered toward premium models by eager staff. One hadn't even been in the room for more than 30 seconds. Still, she nodded politely and took a seat. Minutes crawled by. People came and went. Salesmen smiled and greeted others who walked in after her. The receptionist answered a few calls, chatted with a coworker, and never once looked her way again. After 20 minutes, she rose and approached the desk once more. Excuse me, she said gently. Is the manager available now? The receptionist didn't answer. Instead, a door to the side opened, and a tall man in a press shirt and gleaming shoes stepped out. Clearly the manager. Based on the way others seemed to straighten up as he passed, he looked her over, confused. Are you lost? He asked bluntly. This is the showroom, not service. You looking for financing? She paused for a brief moment, blinking once. No, I'm interested in purchasing a vehicle. I had some questions about inventory. Gave a half laugh as if humoring her. Right. Look, I'm going to be straight with we deal with high-performance models here. Premium space, premium pricing. Maybe check out one of our standard locations if you're serious about buying. This isn't really the place for casual browsing. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no indignation, just a quiet observation, as if she were filing his words away somewhere permanent. The manager gave her a tight nod and turned to leave. muttering something under his breath about how he didn't have time for this. She stood there for a moment longer, still and unreadable. The same luxury cars she'd admired minutes earlier now reflected the cold truth about the building she stood in. This space, these people, they hadn't just dismissed her. They'd tried to erase her completely, right inside the very walls she had built. But none of them knew that yet. Not. Yet, she didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned and walked out the front doors without another word. Her movements were measured, controlled like someone who had already decided what came next. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted streaks across the windshields of the parked cars. She stepped to the edge of the lot and pulled out her phone. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone, when she spoke, was precise, calm, calculated. "Check the live camera feeds for today," she said into the phone. "Focus on front desk interactions and showroom behavior. I want full footage pulled." She paused, listening. "Yes, this location. Confirm timestamps. Also, pull the employee files for the junior salesman and the current floor manager. I want to verify how long they've been assigned here, customer complaint records, and sales history for the last quarter." She hung up without another word. Not a sigh. Not a flinch. She didn't look shaken. She looked resolved. A few moments passed before she stepped back through the dealership doors. She carried no expression of vengeance, only stillness. But the energy in the building shifted the moment she entered. The receptionist glanced up from her monitor and froze. She quickly minimized whatever was on her screen and straightened in her chair, eyes darting toward the interior office. 2. Salesmen by the sidewall cut their conversation short mid-sentence and adjusted their collars, as if unsure whether they were suddenly being watched. No one could put a finger on it, but something had changed. The woman didn't speak. She simply walked slowly past the main desk and stood beside the high-end sports coupe in the center of the showroom floor. She rested her hand lightly against the fender, just like she had earlier, and waited. Moments later, the manager emerged again, this time with a slight edge in his walk. His irritation was clear. Maybe someone had told him she'd come back in. Maybe the receptionist had whispered something. Whatever it was, he was no longer just dismissive. He was defensive. "Okay, ma'am," he said as he approached, hands on his hips. "What is it now?" "I already explained that these vehicles are for serious clients. And unless you're here for a test drive, which again requires an appointment, I need to ask you not to interfere with other guests." She turned to face him slowly. Her voice was soft even without a single note of aggression. "I need to speak to whoever thinks they run this place," she said, "'cause I do." The words were simple, but they landed like a brick on glass. For a second, the manager just stared. Then he blinked, confused, and let out a short laugh. Half mockery, half mockery. "Wait, what?" he said, grinning now. "You own this place?" "Lady, I don't know who told you what, but you can't just walk in here and say that. I manage this location. If you have a complaint, I can file it for you. But let's not start." She didn't let him finish. With fluid precision, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a corporate tablet. Sleek, matte black, branded with the parent company's insignia. She unlocked it with her fingerprint, tapped through a few screens, and then turned it toward him. On the display, a digital ownership profile listing her as majority stakeholder in the regional chain. Beneath it, higher resolution images of her at the ribbon-cutting ceremony during the dealership's grand opening. Legal documents, stockholder agreements, her signature on acquisition records, even an internal email chain from corporate HR listing her as Chief Operating Officer, National Auto Group. The color drained from his face. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The employees nearby began to notice. The junior salesman from earlier had wandered over, arms crossed casually, but now his mouth fell open, even to customers. On the far end of the showroom, overhearing the conversation, had paused mid-negotiation to watch. You could feel the silence wrap around the room like a thick curtain. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. She simply held the screen in front of him a few seconds longer, then pulled it back, locked the tablet, and tucked it away. The manager straightened, clearly rattled. His attempt at a confident stance was gone. His shoulders were stiff, his expression hollow. "I didn't realize no one informed us that you were." She raised a hand. Just slightly, and he stopped speaking. The receptionist stood frozen at her desk, staring at the unfolding scene like she wasn't sure if she should be taking notes or packing a box. The junior salesman suddenly remembered a task and quickly turned back toward the service bay, pretending to look busy. But the damage was done. The truth had arrived in full view of everyone, and no amount of backpedaling could erase what they had all seen. She turned, slow and steady, and began walking toward the manager's office without asking permission. Her heels clicked once, twice, then disappeared down the carpeted hallway behind the showroom floor. No one stopped her. No one dared. She stepped into the manager's office like it already belonged to her because it did. Without asking permission, she crossed the room and eased herself into the large leather chair behind the desk. The staff, who had followed her with their eyes from the showroom, stood frozen outside the glass wall, watching with wide-eyed disbelief. No one moved. No one dared speak. The very air inside the dealership seemed to have changed density, as though the walls themselves recognized who had just taken her rightful seat. She didn't touch the computer on the desk. Instead, she retrieved her tablet again, connected it to the office speaker system with a few simple taps, and placed a call. The screen lit up, displaying the name of the regional director. It rang once, twice, then clicked. A deep voice came through the speaker. "Ma'am, I was just about to call you. I received the footage and the flagged alert from corporate security. Do you want me to escalate this, or will you be handling it personally?" The room outside fell completely silent. The manager stood at the threshold, his arms limp at his sides, his face pale and unmoving. "I'm handling it now," she replied calmly. "But I want everything documented: screen recordings, audio logs, incident timestamps. Send a copy of today's internal surveillance to my legal team. Understood? You're listed as primary authority on the property. We'll begin syncing local data now." A soft hum filled the office as her tablet began accessing the dealership's internal servers. She tapped through the security system, pulling live feed recordings and matching them with timestamps from when she first walked in. Each clip played clearly, the receptionist ignoring her at the desk, the salesman brushing her off, the manager dismissing her outright, his condescending tone on full display. The screen reflected it all, frame by frame, undeniable, unfiltered truth. She played back the footage without a word, letting the silence between each scene say more than outrage ever could. The shame now lived on screen, the faces in the videos were still standing in the room, now squirming under the weight of their own behavior. She moved on, accessing internal employee profiles. Their photos appeared beside performance metrics, disciplinary flags, and complaint logs. She read quietly to herself, customer after customer reporting similar issues, being ignored, judged, or subtly steered toward lesser inventory. Some of the complaints were months old, filed under pending review. Others were newer, left unresolved by the same management team that now stood silently in the hall. The manager finally stepped forward. Lips parted as if to explain, but she didn't even look up. "I didn't come here to cause a scene," she said quietly, her eyes still scanning the files. "I came to observe, to confirm what I had heard but hadn't wanted to believe." At that moment, the door creaked slightly. An older technician, still in his navy work shirt and grease-marked gloves, stood just outside the office. His eyes weren't defensive or cold, they held something closer to regret. He cleared his throat, then took a hesitant step forward. I knew who you were," he said softly. "I saw you when you came in. I've been here since the opening. I recognized you right away, but I didn't say anything." He hesitated, then added with guilt, didn't want to get on anyone's bad side. "They shut down folks who speak up." She finally looked up, locking eyes with him. There was no judgment in her face, only a quiet, measured respect. "You didn't contribute to what happened," she said. "That matters. Silence is hard to forgive, but honesty, especially now, is invaluable." The man nodded slowly, a visible weight lifting from his shoulders. She turned back to the screen and flagged his name. You'll be contacted by HR. Your integrity will be noted on your record. Thank you for speaking up. Then with a final tap, she shut the tablet, stood, and stepped out of the manager's office. Her heels clicked against the floor as she made her way to the center of the showroom. She turned to the staff now, gathered in a loose half-circle around her. The receptionist looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The junior salesman had retreated to the far end, arms crossed tight over his chest. The manager, for the first time, looked small. "I'd like every employee present," she said simply. "Call them in from the back, no exceptions." There was a pause. Then the technician nodded and turned to do exactly that. Within minutes, the showroom was full-service staff, sales reps, office employees, and even the part-time cleaners, all stood quietly, facing the woman they'd unknowingly dismissed. Just hours ago, she looked around the room, her expression calm, collected, but her voice, when she spoke, carried enough weight to silence even thought. "I started this dealership because I wanted to create a space where every customer, regardless of race, gender, or appearance, felt welcome and respected. Where professionalism came before assumptions, and what I witnessed here today was a violation of everything I built this place to stand for." Nobody moved. "I wasn't asking to be treated like a queen," she continued. "I was asking to be treated like a customer. Instead I was ignored, judged, and dismissed. Not for anything I said or did, but for what you assumed about me before I even spoke." She turned her gaze to the manager, then to the receptionist, then back to the crowd. "This dealership is not a clubhouse. It is not a gate to be kept. It is a business I built. Effective immediately. Changes will be made." Air grew still. Every employee seemed to be holding their breath. "I've seen enough to make decisions," she said. "Some of you will remain under new guidelines with full retraining and a probationary period. Others will be dismissed before the hour ends. HR will reach out to each of you individually, and you'll be escorted as needed." Not a single voice challenged her. Not a single eye met hers directly. The same people who had dismissed her were now frozen by the truth they could no longer deny. She stepped away from the center, walking back toward the glass doors. But just before she reached them, she noticed a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, sitting beside her mother in the waiting area. The child had been watching the whole time, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The woman slowed. Their eyes met. The girl gave a small wave, and the CEO, still poised, still unshaken, smiled gently and whispered just loud enough for the child to hear, "Never let anyone tell you you don't belong." Then she stepped outside, sunlight catching her shoulders like a crown, and walked toward the exact luxury car they had tried to steer her away from. As the engine came to life and the tires rolled over the curb, one thing was crystal clear. She didn't just leave in a car. She left owning everything behind it. She stood firmly in the center of the showroom, calm yet commanding. Every eye was on her, and yet she carried no notes, no script, only the weight of truth. Her voice was steady, not loud, but powerful enough to fill every corner of the dealership. "I started this company," she began, "to give people of all backgrounds equal access, equal respect, and equal service. But today, what I witnessed was not excellence, was gatekeeping. It was judgment based on skin color and clothing. It was the kind of silent discrimination that never shows up in ads, but always lives in the fine print of how people are treated." Staff stood frozen, a half circle of silent faces. Some looked down in shame, others looked to each other as if hoping someone else might intervene, but no one moved. She turned slightly, holding up a corporate tablet now connected to the showroom's speaker system. With a few taps, she opened files, real complaints from real customers who, like her, had walked through these doors expecting professionalism and instead found prejudice. She read them aloud. A mother who brought her son to buy his first car. It was ignored for over 30 minutes until her white husband arrived. A local entrepreneur who was offered only the base models until he showed proof of income. A veteran who asked about financing and was laughed at by a staff member who assumed he had bad credit. Each complaint was brief, documented, time Damning. She paused after reading the third one, letting the silence settle. Then she looked up. This didn't start today. It's been happening, and it was tolerated by leadership. Her gaze landed squarely on the manager, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her stare. His expression was a mix of panic and shame, but he stepped forward, raising a hand as if to explain. I understand how this might look, but it's not what. She held up her hand. He stopped mid-sentence. This dealership doesn't need a gatekeeper, she said, her voice cool and unwavering. It needs leadership, and yours ends today. The finality in her tone made it clear there was no room left for negotiation. There were no second chances. The HR representative who had arrived during her speech stepped forward and nodded. Within moments, the manager was told to gather his belongings. Security was called to escort him out. No one spoke a word as he walked past the same employees he had once led, the same ones who had followed his tone, his attitude, his silence. But she wasn't finished. No one replied, but something in the room shifted. The silence was no longer defensive. It was reflective. She could see it in their eyes, the realization that they had just witnessed not a meltdown, not a disruption, but a return of rightful control. She gave a small nod, then stepped away from the center of the room. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed a young girl seated quietly beside her mother in the waiting area. The child had watched everything from behind wide, curious eyes. She couldn't have been more than 10, dressed in a school uniform, her hands folded in her lap. She'd been silent the entire time, but now at the perfect moment, she raised her hand in a shy wave. The CEO slowed her pace. She smiled gently, met the girl's gaze, and leaned just enough to whisper, "Never let anyone tell you don't belong." The girl beamed, her face lighting up like someone had handed her a key to a door she hadn't known existed. Then the woman stepped out into the daylight. Her car, the very model the staff had tried to steer her away from, waited for her, freshly detailed, gleaming under the sun like a quiet victory. She walked to it slowly, not with the air of someone proving a point, but someone reclaiming her place. She slid into the driver's seat, the doors closing around her like the final chapter of a story that should have never been necessary. As the engine came to life and the car began to roll forward, employees watched from inside, still, stunned, still trying to process what had happened. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just about the car. This was about ownership, of space, of power, of identity. She didn't just drive off in a luxury vehicle. She drove off as the owner of the entire building behind her hand now. Everyone knew it.